Okay, can you all hear me? Let's get started because I do want to use all the time I have to talk with you. This is not going to be a lecture style discussion. I mean, it's a discussion. And this setup is for me because I like to see all of you and I'd like you all to see each other. And of course, you're here tonight because these amazing people are hosting this important event. Frantz Fanon. I wrote my dissertation partly about Fanon. And I'll tell you a little bit more about me in just a moment. But what I'd like to hear from all of you is what you know about Frantz Fanon. If there's a particular quote, a book, any kind of thing that you know, I'd like to hear about it, please, so that it can help guide our conversation. So should we just go, always start on the left. Should we go here? Let's do it. Savannah, you.
Well, hi, my name is Savannah. I'm one of the organizers here at All Power Books. I know Frantz Fanon from Wretched of the Earth. And I know, it's so sad, I just listened to a podcast about Fanon in preparation for this, but I feel like I'm having a brain fart right now. Just an incredible activist, scholar, revolutionary. I'll pass the mic.
Good evening, everybody. What I know about Frantz Fanon, I think just the phenomenon of the new man. You and I have had plenty of conversations about the new man and, who we are and just the work I do too. I think that his concept of the new man, creating or becoming the new man is what stands out to me right now.
Hi everyone, I'm Lena Hicks. I am actually a novice to Frantz Fanon, but I've heard a little bit about him and his work through my partner, who's to my left.
Hi everyone, I'm Arturo. I'm having trouble too, but decolonial thought. I think I have his book on my shelf. I kind of pick through it every once in a while, but yeah, just coming across quotes that I've found really helpful for me to try to understand third world decolonial struggle and kind of like the interconnections between all those struggles. He's been very helpful for me.
Hi everyone, I'm Steve. I have read various things that Fanon wrote over the years, bits and pieces, never sort of like entire books at once. So I would also describe myself as a novice, but yeah, excited to be a part of the conversation and learn more.
Hello everyone, my name is Leora. I read Wretched of the Earth last year, but I read it alone, so I definitely missed kind of the discussion component, so yeah, excited to learn more.
I'm Gabs. I don't know that much about Fanon, except for stuff my girlfriend told me.
Yeah, I'm currently reading Wretched of the Earth. Yeah, I mean, I guess he's from Martinique, psychiatrist by trade, I believe. Yeah, very involved in the struggle in Algeria as well. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Aaron. I think I heard about Frantz Fanon only somewhat recently in studying Palestinian resistance movement and some like quotations of his on the role of violence in revolutionary decolonization. And so then I just read this first chapter recently, or the last couple of days, of The Wretched of the Earth, but that's basically a limitation of my knowledge.
Hi, I'm Shaylee. I'm a past student of Dr. Tahani's. Everything I know about Frantz Fanon is through the class that I took with her. I wrote my final paper about it. A quote that stuck with me, I might be butchering it, is that like decolonization is always a violent event. And I haven't checked out the entirety of Wretched of the Earth, but I'm checking out Black Skin, White Masks, I believe it's called, right now. So yeah.
Hi, I'm Justin. I don't know much about Frantz Fanon, but I'm excited to be a part of this discussion and learn more about it.
Hi, my name is Chaim. I encountered Fanon in grad school. I'm currently writing a dissertation in psychology, but using trying to draw from Fanon and his concept of the zone of non-being to deconstruct borderline personality disorder into like his clinical work and revolutionary work intersect kind of exactly where I want to be with the work that I'm trying to do. So.
Hey, I'm Reese. I'm here, I guess. I've encountered Fanon in a few different capacities. You know, him cited, but also I read Black Skin, White Masks in college. Really just kind of gave me a lot of the frameworks to think about the psychological impacts of the just kind of like colonial history, hegemony that we are contend with. And got through Wretched of the Earth halfway, got distracted. Hopefully this will inspire me to get back.
Hi, my name is Niran. I'm new to Fanon, but I'm excited to learn more.
Hi, my name is Josh. I got introduced to Frantz Fanon through a really cool Middle Eastern Studies professor in college, and read Wretched of the Earth, Black Skin, White Masks, and it's just a really fundamental in helping me understand like anti-colonial violence and that sort of thing. Gigi is also familiar with Frantz Fanon.
Hey, my name's Kolya. Yeah, I think we're all here because Frantz Fanon was a dangerous man, right, and still is. I'm excited to talk about why I think that's the case. But what I really like about him, to kind of go off of what you were saying, is he made it cool for the first time, I think, to be a psychoanalytic Marxist-Leninist, which you don't get every day. So that's why I'm here.
Hey, my name is Gabe, and my favorite thing about Fanon is that he wasn't just an academic and a, you know, psychologist, but he was involved in the struggle for the Algerian Revolution and a part of the Popular Front, so he put it into practice. So, and I'm very happy you're doing this. So.
Hello, my name is Ismail. I haven't really read much about Fanon, and I'm just here to analyze from what I've analyzed from other revolutionaries and see what was his perspective.
Hi, my name is August. I studied psychology in grad school, and nobody ever introduced me to Fanon. I didn't discover Fanon until some years later when I was studying with the United Panther Movement, and they got me reading Fanon. And everything that was falling flat about trying to do therapy and psychology during 2020, when I started reading Wretched of the Earth, it blew my mind. He just like lays bare the implicit biases within American psychology that are just so unchecked neoliberal ideology, you know, and he really helped me deconstruct some of that. Also, he was a playwright too. I'm going to read some of his plays next. That's just kind of mind-blowing that he was such an amazing social scientist, revolutionary, and playwright.
Yeah,
such a cool
right.
Here you go, comrade. Would you like to?
We're talking about what we know about Fanon. You guys want to hop in? Okay.
Well, hello, my name is Fatima, she, her, ella pronouns. I came across Fanon during the pandemic. One of my best friends was in grad school, and I asked her if she could share her grad school reading list. And I was like, okay, well, out of those books, which one do you recommend reading? And she told me this one, but I've never gotten the chance to like talk about it in a group setting, so that's why I'm here.
Hi everyone, I'm Viv, pronoun she, her, ella. I was introduced to Fanon in grad school. I study reproductive justice and just reproductive histories of Latin America, and I've been really fascinated by the theories and thoughts that he's provided us with, and really excited to be here in community and discuss it with you all.
So nice to see some friends from the past. Yeah, JD, do you want to share what you know of Fanon, why Wretched of the Earth matters to you, or any other texts, anything to share?
No, I've seen the movie not too long ago. Talks about greatly about Frantz Fanon and inspired other people.
Yes, right on. Okay, well, thank you for sharing that. And some of you will I think be interested to hear some myths busted tonight. And so I'd love to hear your feedback on that too. Let me get into what we're gonna do. So I do have a little bit of agenda, just mainly to keep myself on task. This was a bit of the introductions. I'll get into a brief biography of Fanon. I also want us to think about why he matters and really always matters. And you heard a couple folks share, right, the different spaces that his name comes up that you wouldn't expect. We'll go over a few of the key ideas from the first chapter, which is called On Violence. And then I have some takeaways for you. How do you put Fanon in praxis, right? Theory into practice, which was very important to him. Okay. Some fun things about Fanon's biography. So the boring stuff. He was born in July of 1925 in Martinique. I think it matters a lot that we think of him and his Black radical thought as part of the tradition of the Caribbean. This is very, very important. He died December 6th. So yesterday was, my math is bad, like 63 years ago, right? Something like that, a long time ago, but it was yesterday. But you'll notice he died in Maryland. And so we'll talk about how this revolutionary from the Caribbean, who ends up spending the majority of his adult life in Algeria, ends up dying in Maryland. I also think it's important for you to know that he came from a middle-class family, so he didn't really struggle in the sense of struggle of the proletariat, right? He was sent to prestigious schools, and what's very important is he was taught by Aimé Césaire. How many of you are familiar with Césaire? Super important thinker of the Black radical tradition. Some folks don't know that Fanon was a decorated veteran of World War II. He was very eager to fight against the Nazis on the French side, but a lot of things happened during that time when he was serving that led to what becomes black skin, white masks. So those of you who have read that. This is a little bit of tea. I don't know, I just put it here because I think it's interesting. But so he had a daughter with a college classmate. And her family, she was white, and her family disapproved of their relationship. And so this woman got pregnant, and he abandoned her, abandoned the child. His older brother, Joby, who was very close to him, told him that what he's doing is wrong, and he needs to accept this child. And so over time he did, but he and Mariel never really had a very close relationship. He ends up marrying Josie, who's a well-known freedom fighter herself, and they had a son, Olivier. And Olivier carried on a lot of his father's work. Both of his children are still living today. Some fun facts, lesser-known facts. How many of you are familiar with Richard Wright, the American writer? That was Frantz Fanon's favorite writer. So I highly recommend, if you're interested in Fanon, to read the work of Richard Wright. Richard Wright was an American communist. He was chased out of the United States during the McCarthy era. At one point, he and Fanon were both in Paris, and I love this little story about Fanon, very excited about the possibility of meeting Richard Wright, and he tried so hard to get to this conference that Wright was presenting at, and they just kind of missed each other. And of course, a few years later, Fanon dies, and he never got to meet this writer that he loved. He also did study playwriting, literature, and he wrote poetry. This matters because for those of us who enjoy his writing, it is that training, I would argue, that makes his writing so fun. You feel that passion, the word choices. He speaks to us as someone who can speak with people regardless of your own formal education, right? That's one of the beauties of his work. In his short life, he died at the age of 36. He wrote 4 books, numerous essays. He was the spokesperson for the FLN, so he was constantly writing speeches, traveling, newspaper articles, all kinds, like just constant intellectual work. I don't know if anybody knows he played guitar. I thought that was fun. Good job, Fanon. He loved to perform at parties. He loved to dance. Also, any opportunity he had to play soccer, he did. He loved to joke. He was a big jokester. This part is kind of sad and maybe led to his early death, but he only slept about 3 to 5 hours a night, which makes sense because of all the stuff that he wrote, right? So he was hardly sleeping, but constantly creating. And this last part, women's labor, and the way that sometimes men in activist circles abuse women's labor, Josie was his typist, right? Most of the time, his wife. And Wretched of the Earth was typed out on his deathbed. He never actually wrote the Wretched of the Earth, literally. He would speak it until he really couldn't anymore, and then Josie, and then he did have a personal secretary, and these two women essentially typed out this massive text. Any questions so far? I just love that he loved to dance. Okay, so why does he matter? And here he is in this picture. I always, if I talk about Fanon, if I talk about Malcolm X, Martin Luther King Jr., I want us to remember that they were fathers. I think this is really, really important, especially because they are black men. And black men are vilified as being these absentee fathers, right? And so in this picture, playful Fanon, you know, I don't know what Olivier is sitting on, but it's some kind of like tricycle thing. I don't know. Anyway, here he is playing with his son. And something that, for me, when I encountered Fanon, I forgot to give my own biography a little bit. So I am the child of Iranian exiles. My parents, I was telling Martine, my partner, this story. My parents were living in Iran, 1977. My father had served in the Shah's army, left because he saw and he recognized all the corruption and the empire was falling apart. He left had to jump through 1,000 hoops, but so he's like, I want to go to France. And he did. He went to Paris and he was looking for opportunities to take us, right? And he and my mom wanted to continue their studies and go back. So he wanted the dust to kind of settle with the Shah and the little, you know, what do you call, like skerfuffle, whatever, right? They had living, and so he was like, let's let it die down, let's go study. But he didn't have many opportunities in Paris, and so he was like, let's hit up the United States, right? Where there were more opportunities for international students. So they go to New York. I always like to say my mom and dad carried me into the United States. I have an older brother too. And New York didn't work out. They came to LA. LA didn't work out. They ended up in Missouri. So my formative years were in Columbia, Missouri. And then, of course, the revolution happened. My dad ended up on the new regime's hit list. And then, you know, they couldn't return. We couldn't return. I went back to Iran for the first time in my life when I was 30. Oh my God, it's Lisa Bailey. Okay. So I say all this to say that Fanon's work is deeply intertwined in how colonialism, empire, power affect us all, right? My own life trajectory changed because the father of the Iranian Revolution, Ali Shariati, translated The Wretched of the Earth for the revolutionaries that enacted that rebellion. And so I feel a very deep connection to this text. I didn't realize when I first encountered it why, but after years and years of research, I'm like, oh, of course it was Fanon, right? He's very, very important to my life. So I do think we need to think about that. I would invite you to think about your own heritages, your own family stories. His text, This Wretched of the Earth, was translated into over 60 languages, influenced multiple revolutions and rebellions. So you may have ended up here for some similar reasons, right? You couldn't stay, couldn't go back. You're kind of like in this exile mode. I also love that he lays out a plan for decolonization, and we'll go over that in just a moment, but he has almost a step-by-step process for what decolonization looks like every day, every day. The other thing that's really important about this thinker is the way he keeps us accountable to ourselves and each other, right? There's definitely a sense of, in the process of decolonization, you have an accountability to yourself, but also to your community. He doesn't do anything on that individual level, right? This is one of the very powerful parts of Fanon. He also believes in multifaceted solidarities. A lot of people get excited to think about his ideas on nationalism, but I think we'll talk about this a little bit if you're interested. He thinks of nationalism as a nation-state nationalism as a tool, not the goal. And so on his deathbed, he kept saying to his Algerian comrades, you're making a lot of mistakes. You're heading into developing a nation state, and that's going to be your demise. And even worse, it's a religious nation state, right? One of the big arguments he had with Ali Shariati, the father of the Islamic Revolution, was he kept telling him, religion isn't going to work. It'll become fascistic. And a lot of these revolutionaries in Southwest Asia and North Africa kind of brushed that very important warning aside. Okay. It was mentioned that he's a psychiatrist, and this is super important for folks who are doing psychology. I don't know if you know this, but he also wanted to be a dentist. He also wanted to be a lawyer, but those programs took too long. So he was like, F it, I'll just do psychiatry, right? But some very interesting, important things about that choice include that he wanted to be trained as a medical doctor. Now think about that as far as skills are concerned and how that plays out in a revolutionary scene. Okay, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But he was also a psychologist. And so the way he was caretaking of the mind and the body makes him particularly unique. There are stories of when he became the director of the mental health hospital in Blaida, Algeria. In the daytime, he ran it like a clinic, mostly French people, right, coming to see him for various reasons. And at night, it was a clinic for the rebels. And that kind of giving back is what I think is so important about Fanon. He was, as I said, a husband, a father, a friend. How he managed all of that simultaneously is really what makes him so, I don't know, beautiful to me, right? It's not common to see that. It's also probably why he only slept 3 hours a night, but I digress. Okay. So, and then finally, something that I think we should talk about a lot more is how Fanon envisions decolonization in creative ways, right? Everybody loves and is sort of like seduced by his concepts of violence, but I will tell you that violence broke his heart. This was not something he wanted for the oppressed. It was more like it's inevitable, right? People are always like, he pushes for violence, he just wants violence. Violence comes at us. He just says you can meet violence with violence, right? Should echo Malcolm X as well, right? And sort of, you step on my neck, I'm gonna break your foot. That's what it is. It's not about wanting that for the colonized, okay? So we'll come back to that too. And finally, this one's huge, because whenever I feel hopeless, Arturo, you said you always picked up the book and looked through it again. Same, when I feel hopeless, I'm like, oh yeah, page 52, there's the hope, okay, let's just wait. So very, very important to keep those things in mind. Any questions? I love that he turned the hospital into something else at night, though. That's fun. Okay. There we go. So a couple of things that I would like us to look at specifically, and I guess from what I'm understanding, only a few of you have read this first chapter, so I'm gonna try my best to go over these key ideas, knowing that a lot of you haven't read it or it's been a minute, right? Let me ask you, and someone please do answer, because I like conversation. What is decolonization? If you were going to explain decolonization to a 10-year-old, what would you say to the 10-year-old? What is that? Don't make me call on you. What is, okay, thank you.
Okay, well, I'll try my best because I'm actually an elementary school teacher. I would say, to explain it to terms that I could say in the classroom, it is the process it is a process in where you who has had their land and where they come from taken from them or at all taken out of their control, it's where they get that control back. And they begin to direct their lives themselves.
Excellent. Yes, and a 10-year-old would get that.
Yeah,
They would have 1,000 annoying questions, but they would get that. Yes. Any other? How would you, Martine? How would you explain it to a 10-year-old? Yes, sir.
Talking to a 10-year-old, I like that answer about land, but also as an indigenous person, as a multi-ethnic person, I would also say decolonization also is be careful, understanding our roots, our food, our music, our culture, our dance, and also being able to understand to a point where I can give that to the generation after me, right? And also understanding that many of these things, especially under the roof of capitalism, that this isn't how our people were created.
Right.
This isn't where our people, how we supported ourselves. This isn't, we don't create harm for profit, and I don't even know if profit was really a thing, right?
Right.
So I think with the food, music, culture, traditions, norms, that's how I would explain it to a 10-year-old. That's how I explain it to students too. Like, what is it we're putting in what is it that we're putting in our bodies, and where does it come from?
Absolutely, yes. That's why I called on you, Dr. Leva. But yes, so I think one of the most important things to say is in understanding decolonization, what is colonization? What got taken away? Namely land, right? And we're going to get to that quote about the land is the most valuable. But as Martine shared, decolonization, and this is where Fanon lays it out for us as a daily practice, every day, you have to think about who you were before colonization, right? And so the top things that he guides us to think about are language. What is the language you speak? Right now it's English. That's a colonizer's language. Sometimes people will say like, right, so it's Spanish. Like, that's a colonizer's language, right? You have to keep going back to get to that point where something very precious got taken away. Embedded in language is feeling. So for example, we have cultures, we have languages that don't even have pronouns. Bless their hearts, my parents will say things like, my daughter, he teaches at Pasadena City College, and it's absolutely correct in Persian, right? And so I invite you to think about that daily practice of what other languages did your people speak? What foods did your people eat? And I love indigenous activists on Turtle Island who have really taken this calling and are sharing it back with all of us. And we're realizing there's certain foods that we shouldn't eat, right? Like they're literally killing us. So, your spiritual practices, your hairstyles, your clothing styles, right? All of these things, look at us, we're pretty much wearing the same thing. And yet, we have very different heritages. So Fanon gives you that play-by-play, and that's how you do it. You don't know it, you ask your parents. They don't know it, you ask your grandparents. They're not around, you ask another person who's in the community and who's older. You can find your answers, right? So daily practice. And when he says it's a violent event, I think in the auspices of empire, we think of that as militaristic violence. But the violence is actually psychic. When you realize so much of who you are was taken from you, and there's a concentrated effort to keep it away from you. That's the violence he's talking about. Does that make sense, everyone? Any questions just on that? So I think the key, and the reason I wanted to do on violence, is because we have a very narrow view of what violence looks like and what violence means. And for Fanon, It's actually all the horrible things that happened before they pulled out their guns and cannons. That was the last step. Okay, but I also want you to think about these 2 points. Yes, question? Yes, Lena.
Does he at all at any point apply that violence of like loss of heritage, loss of sense of place, sense of like place of origin in relation to white people?
So that's an excellent,
or the creation of whiteness as like a cultureless identity.
Right, right. Yeah, I mean, it's the, first of all, I want you to know this, that Fanon's biggest fallout with his mentor, Aimé Césaire, was on the fact that Césaire believed in black nationalism, and Fanon didn't. So you may be surprised to know that. Fanon has, I get chills when I say this, because he has the same deep love and care for white people that he does for colonized people. This is something that we can't ignore, and people want to. They really want to, because they want somebody to be like, fuck them, right? Like, he thinks that you gotta make it work. You're equally harmed, right? This is the whole idea, that whiteness ideology harms everybody, and it's not an oppression Olympics. It's bad for all of us, period. White people gave up all of that indigeneity for the power that they now have, but the power is only destructive. So while he doesn't, and he never says like, he doesn't say, dear black person, do this, this, this. Dear Persian person, do that. No, he's saying all of you do this. And the challenge, Lena, for white people is they're the farthest removed. They're the farthest removed, right? In my experience with students, when we do this practice in the classroom, it's the white students who are always the most devastated at this conversation. Because the most they can go back is, well, I think my grandparents immigrated from Germany. But who were they in Germany? Germany wasn't always Germany, right? And so I hope that answers your question, but Fanon really, I think that's one of the beautiful things that I also sometimes like have tension with, and I read him again, I'm like, yes, that's right, mentor, you're right. That he doesn't hate anyone. He does not hate anyone. He hates colonizing, and everyone's capable of it. So we'll get to that too. Any other questions? So white people are just as welcome in the process of decolonization. The sad thing is, it's a shit ton harder than it is for the rest of us. I actually don't even have to go that far back, personally, right? My parents literally, if they could have gone back to Iran tomorrow, they would, you know? Maybe the same is true for a lot of you, but for a lot of white people today, I say this with the most broken heart, like, where do you even start? What was given up was so much that all you can tell me is you know where your nation state ancestry is? Arturo's laughing. It's like, I'd be, oh my God, okay, Poland, yay, what? Like, what did you eat? What did your clothing styles look like? What were the dialects your people spoke? They don't know, right? So, and I think Fanon would say, don't leave them behind. Yeah, don't leave them behind. Let's help, like, where can you place it? And you know, sometimes my partner, like the idea of pretendians, where you have, it's mostly white people who say things like, I'm a Cherokee, I'm Chickasaw. And you're like, bet, like what, right? So they're trying, and it's heartbreak, it's embarrassing, yeah. Okay, so that's that, okay, so I'm gonna get to the next point, which might be very useful too. The idea of a historical process, decolonization. Let me see if I can say this in a way that honors the point. Fanon doesn't think of decolonization as an end goal. And this is super important because we are trained under whiteness ideology, right, heteronormativity. You have this goal, these are the steps, boom, you're done. That's not how decolonization works. Anyone who's had experience with psychology, therapy, It's that onion, right? You keep peeling the layers back. You think you got something, boom, you're hit with something else, right? So that's the historical process. And when he says historical, again, it's never just about you alone, it's about you and your community, right? I might be further ahead than some diasporic Persians, but I can't leave them behind, right? Like, come here, let me tell you why you're anti-black, right? And why that's not okay. Like, you don't just leave, you're constantly, and so that historical process is not just about you. Please remember that, right? Any questions about that? I think that's the best way to describe what he means. It's not like it's an end goal. You do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 steps, you're decolonized. No, it's for the rest of your life. And if, like, I have 2 kids, if I'm lucky, they will inherit that from me, and then they will pass that on. Like, it's a never-ending process. Remember that the conditions we live in today took 400 plus years to be established. It's going to take at least that long to demolish. And so the process has been happening. And, you know, different points in history, people have plugged in. They gave us the tools that they knew. Then we develop our tools, you know. So it kind of is this ongoing thing until it's eradicated. Yeah, yeah.
It might not be a physical violence, but it's like, you're wrong, that's not right. And I'm like, that second point, it just hit me right then. It's like, the more I try to change, like, and decolonize, the more even my own family infighting about that shit is also like, pins us up against each other. I'm like, if it's here, I can't even not, it's like at a systemic level.
Yeah, yeah. But what do you do, Martine, when you get the pushback? Do you just kind of like, I'm out?
I gotta take care of myself first. You know what I mean? As shitty as that sounds, because I don't like to be a selfish person, but the pushback from my own community, starting with the family, and I'm also talking about my community with my upbringing, I've been around gangs. Like, the more I change, the more they don't like it. That decolonization creates violence just in that community. And I'm like, okay, I need to step back because I don't want to revert back to old me, right? Like, I like this new me, but new me actually causes violence within the closest people to me. And I'm just like, okay, self-care, understand that this is a me process right now. And the more I understand me, the more I'll still try to continue, because you're right, you can't forget those ones, especially closest to you.
Yeah.
Especially if I want the long haul struggle to decolonize against a bigger system.
Right.
Right? So that's a very interesting thing that just, and I've read this before, and I'm like, it just hit me at a different level. All right, cool.
I'm honored. Any other thoughts? Anything popping up? Yeah.
I was just thinking about, there's always, like, you know, decolonization is a historical process, and you know, it's a response to colonialism, which is it entrenches itself continually and transforms itself. And just similar to what you're saying, like, I talk to my brother about shit that we have just vastly different experiences. We present differently. He doesn't grow his hair out, I do. And you know, I make jokes about him, like, you know, your mind is colonized, bro. You know, like, you don't.
It never goes over well.
Yeah, exactly. And he just, like, you know, laughs it out. But particularly don't want to, you know, talk about. We won't talk about the theory, but I think it's so interesting how so many people died in the '60s, and they could not see it. You know, the inflection point at that time of, like, the technological capacity of colonialism, neocolonialism, transforming, and how their theories could be applied to that, and how, like, really, I mean, the frontier of colonialism is the mind. It's such a trip. So,
absolutely,
and it is ongoing. We have, you know, manipulation in our pockets these days. So,
yeah.
Yeah.
That's really well said. Thank you. Others, anything?
And really quick, I just wanted to say we're using this mic because we are live streaming. We just have a camera facing you, but we're live streaming the event. So for the audience that's online to be able to hear what we're saying in here, to use this. I know it's really quiet for us, but they can hear it really well in the computer. So thank you.
No other. Okay. All right. Okay. So let's talk for a moment about this. On page 2, I'm going to read it real quick. Unless, do you have a copy? Can you read this quote real quick, just so I don't keep hearing myself? Yeah, please. Do you know where the quote starts? I'm sorry?
Which quote exactly?
So let's start with the paragraph, decolonization never goes unnoticed. It's the second page. You got it?
Mine
Cool.
has a slightly different translation. But
No worries, yeah.
Decolonization never takes place unnoticed, for it influences individuals and modifies them fundamentally. It transforms spectators crushed with their inessentiality into privileged actors with the grandiose glare of history's floodlights upon them. It brings a natural rhythm into existence introduced by new men and with a new language and a new humanity. Decolonization is the veritable creation of new men, but this creation owes nothing of its legitimacy to any supernatural power. The thing which has been colonized becomes man during the same process by which it frees itself.
Excellent, thank you. Yeah, we do have very different translations, but mine's better. Anyway, no, and I don't say that. That's what French scholars that do translations say. The Phil Cox translation is apparently the one that is a star of translation. Anyway, let's move on. French is a colonial language. Okay. But here, I think what's really interesting is that he's talking about this new generation, this new humanity, okay? Is anyone familiar with Afro-pessimism? Yes, some, okay. I'm not gonna even get into it because not enough people, that's like a whole other few hours of conversation. So, but the idea of humanity, and the reason he's using this is because during the European Enlightenment, I'm gonna do Afro-pessimism in 2 seconds. Wow, okay. They create whiteness ideology. And the tangent of whiteness ideology is settler colonialism. So the way these European Enlightenment thinkers are creating a new humanity, and I mean Hegel, the star of academia, who infamously says Africa has no history. And it's really funny because I saw a meme that said, then why are all the African cultural artifacts in your museums, right? Yeah. And so, Hegel, Kant, Voltaire, you have Linnaeus, and they're thinking about how to separate the state from the church. Bravo, good for you. Like other people have done that before. Come along, humans, right? And so the way that they start to do this is by classification. They start to classify the world they live in. Beautiful. Like, I would love to know what this plant is versus that one, Gigi versus a dog, right? Beautiful, interesting, helpful, but they do it to humans too. And they put themselves at the top. And this is where they create the categories of race. White, perfect, beautiful, the epitome. Everybody should try to be here. And then this they're like, okay, well, we'll just call them like this mess of people of color, the brown, Asian, right? Like they have some history, but they're not white, and so little lower tier. And then they come to Africa, and Africa is so abundant, they don't know what to do, and it strikes fear. And they say, you know what, they're not even human. And they create things like chattel enslavement, which didn't exist ever in history. Right? Chattel enslavement separates the European Enlightenment from all other empires, all other trains of thought. And essentially what they do then is they create new human beings. So when we say that the struggle today is about civil rights, Fanonians, Afro-pessimists will say, but most of us aren't even entitled to that category of human. Most of the civil rights are tied to your status as human. Who gets to have all the benefits and privileges? White, straight, upper-class Christian men. They don't protest for their rights. And that's not an accident. That's by design. But what Fanon is talking about, and this is where Afro-pessimists love to use him, and then it gets confusing because he's like, no, I'm not going to forsake humanity. I'm going to call us all in, right, by the language of today. I'm not calling you out and abandoning you. I'm going to call you in and invite you to fix it. Because we can. Because the person who was deemed white was harmed the most. I have a brilliant black thinker who, Chaz Cruz, shout out. He came to our school and he said something really important. It was very simple and so powerful. And he said, a lot of times the problem with white folks is they don't understand community beyond their family. That's something white folks were robbed of, right? We kind of get it. If you're brown, you understand. If you're black, you understand. Right? If you have Timmy screaming on the corner, you're not going to call the cops. It's 4 o'clock, Timmy comes out and he screams on the corner. But once the white people move in, Timmy's suddenly arrested, beaten, maybe murdered. But it's something Timmy did for 10 years, like, right? The concept of community was robbed of white people. And so Fanon doesn't forsake them, though. This is really, really important. And when he says that it's a creation of new men, this is an invitation. What is that new language going to be? What is that new rhythm, the new vibe, the new way of being going to be? This part he doesn't lay out for us because decolonization is a historical process. Every generation has to figure it out for themselves. One thing will work at this point, another will work at another point, so on and so forth. There is no script. But does the work have to happen? Yes. Any questions? I hope I'm not moving too fast. This is more like a goal to plant seeds. Questions? Anything? Okay. This next quote I think is really important when we think about Palestine. I never talk about Palestine without talking about Turtle Island. Because they're simultaneous struggles for liberation with a lot of parallels. And I think if we think of these issues as Fanonians, we can't not think about Turtle Island, right? I don't have the images with me now, but for example, you all maybe saw the images of Gaza where things have just been razed to the ground. And then there are real estate companies that are inviting Israelis and even Americans to purchase lands, and they have blueprints for what the homes will. Guess what? It looks like Riverside. Those settlements, like I don't know why we call them suburbs and not settlements in San Bernardino. Have you seen what I'm talking about? Like when you're driving on the 15 and you see like this mountain of all these identical homes. Every time you see a for sale sign here in Tongva, you know it's unceded territory, right? You know it's active settler colonialism, right? Every time you see a new building construction here on our campus, for example, that's active settler colonization. Nobody talked to the Tongva. So whatever's happening in Palestine, I really, really encourage you, as people who respect Fanon, to remember it's the same in New Zealand, it's the same in South Africa, it's the same in Palestine, it's the same here. And so this new humanity, this new creation of people, what do we do? I was teasing my partner, like, Martin, would you like to buy a house someday? He doesn't own a house. And he was like, what? So that like now I pay my colonizer to let me pay a monthly mortgage to the banks they run, right? I mean, that's the reality. We chuckle because it's true. So what do we do though? Okay, I don't have answers, by the way. So if you have thoughts, please share. I'm telling you what's going on. So this idea of land, the most essential value because it is the most meaningful, literally, right, when we think about the land, we think about indigenous people everywhere and the way they cultivate that land, right? A lot of indigenous people like to be called stewards of the land. The colonizer keeps asking them, do you own it? And you don't own land? Why do you own land? We don't own land, right? We steward the land. And so anytime someone has these concepts of ownership, especially of land, they're so colonized. Remember you said, you're so colonized, bro. Like, yes, yes.
I just, maybe you'll elaborate, you'll have your own perspective, but it's so illuminating to me how there's so much discussion these days about, with the housing crisis. People are like, housing is not a commodity or an investment, right? And I think it's like beyond that, because that stops at a certain point where we miss the point of like actually owning the land or demarcating it itself is the problem.
Right.
Instead of just it being an investment or unaffordable, it's just levels of absurdity when you really take it down to this level. And you saying that just got me to think about it,
I love that word, absurdity, right? They're normalizing absurdity. Settler colonizers want us to normalize the absurd. And this is why it's so difficult, and this is why it creates anxiety and depression and different disorders, because we're constantly being gaslit and manipulated to believe in things that we know in our hearts aren't real and true, and it's harmful. Yeah, I mean, I don't know how to really resist against it other than to say, first we need to name it, right? This is what it is. And this isn't to shame anyone who says like, man, I was really hoping to buy a house someday, right? Like, maybe you still can if it's in a different kind of structure and situation, right? Maybe it's not about buying, but some kind of collective living, or I don't know. The point is, Fanon wants us to be creative. Be creative. You don't have to do it the way they've dictated it, right? I'll give you a really, really quick example. Anybody, are you familiar with Pasadena? There's a community north of Pasadena called Altadena, and people were so excited like 2 or 3 years ago when the headlines across the newspapers and the internet were all about the Tongva people got land back. And I was flabbergasted, right? Because if you know the history, you know the government doesn't want to talk to the Tongva. And so I dug a little bit, and guess what it is? It's a private citizen who owns this land, and she granted 1 acre back. That's it. So, I mean, I still think that was a powerful move. This person probably has acres and acres, but 1 acre. So I wonder if it requires us giving each other that, right? You have family wealth, and the family wealth is in real estate. Give it back. Yeah, Lisa.
So we had somebody that was fixing something in our apartment. He was Chumash, and he was telling us about in Malibu, the lease, the 100-year leases are going to expire shortly. And the current chief of the Chumash has no intention of letting them renew. So they should be ceded back to the Chuma. They should be granted back to the Chumash. So I'm very interested in watching that. I just wanted to make everybody aware of that. I don't exactly know. I think it was like 2040. Like it's not tomorrow, but it's imminent.
But they're young. Look at them.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. y'all can go and watch them take that.
Well, I think this is a beautiful sharing. Thank you, Lisa, because it gives us an actionable plan. Now our task, as those of us who are not Chumash, we should find out how we can help, right? What do we do? Because the United States government is famous for breaking promises, right? Broken treaties, still. Okay, comment, question? Okay, so this quote I really appreciate. It's the 5th bullet point where he says, the peoples of the third world, and today of course we call the third world global south, are in the process, Fanon really likes that word, by the way. Like process. I want to do like some kind of annotation, just count how many times he said, but it's a great word. So in the process of shattering their chains, and look at the walls, Martine, they got shattered chains. And what is extraordinary is that they succeed. And I remember when I first read that, I was like, no, they're not. Like, colonialism's still alive and well, so let's talk about this. What does he mean? Again, in my colonized viewpoint, I'm thinking about shattering chains as guns and cannons and fighting back, and, right? But what he's talking about is that recognition of the mental colonization, coming back to a sense of who you are before being told who you are, right? Our ancestors didn't understand. Like, if I went to my great-grandmother and I was like, they're telling me I'm brown. And she was like, you're pretty light. Like, what are you, brown? What's that, what? They didn't refer to each other this way, right? And this is part of that decolonization. And the success is reclaiming an ethnic identity, moving away from a racial identity. Not that race isn't real. Man, is it real. And they'll make sure we know it's real. It's structural, it's institutional, it's systemic. You can't escape it. But in your head, you can. And this goes back to that first point. Do you know your languages, your food, your clothing, your, right? And on and on. The final quote, and this was so hard for me, everybody. I hope you realize, like, to just find a couple quotes from this chapter. Like, if you look at my copy, it's like highlighted, underlined, footnote, like, okay, anyway, so I did my best. I like this one to end here. But the work of the colonist, this is super, super important, is to make even dreams of liberty impossible for the colonized. The work of the colonized, I think this is ancestral. They're like, slow down. Yes, yes, pause. The work of the colonized is to imagine every possible method for annihilating the colonist. Again, I think a lot of people get excited by these words because we think of annihilation as death, murder, destruction, burn it down, right? Like, and maybe it is, that's one of the many things, but more so it's about building the future. If you annihilate the colonists, you annihilate the narrative. Let's talk for a minute about Palestine. If you notice, Zionists get very nervous when they see people are speaking truth to their power. It's the shattering of the illusions, right? It's super interesting that, I just read this too somewhere today. Oh my God, Gigi, yes, please. That if you look at these various like conferences and spaces where Zionists are speaking, they get so disturbed by seeing the writing of like a Palestinian child or drawing. What is it? What is the power in that shakes them to the core? It's the divestment, the sanctioning, the boycotting of the colonizer's narrative. Keep that in mind, right? Again, when he says these words, like I always think like, why do people get so excited with Fanon and nonviolence and annihilation, right? Like, again, he literally, I hope I didn't say this, but I hope you know, that he treated people in the hospital in the daytime, and he picked up his rifle and he went on the battlefront the same day. So it's not that he didn't even enact violence, but the violence he wants us to really confront is the one Martine mentioned too, in your mind. And then even when you hear the pushback, right? Like I grew up with parents who are constantly like, just, you know, do your work, it's politics, doesn't matter for us. Like, that's what I grew up with, and it was actually very harmful. Sorry, mom and dad. Okay, but not sorry, but you should hear it, you know? Like, so some of that is what you're dealing with too. I think when I'm in the classroom with younger people, and I know, especially if they're children of exiles and immigrants, I know what you're hearing at home. But you also have me now. Like, I'm that auntie, like, you know, I'll support you. You do you, push back, get rid of it. It's not actually going to serve you in the long run. Decolonization is a process. You don't want to get stuck in the front. Okay. Any questions, comments, anything? We're almost done. Martine has the most adorable dog who has seizures, and we have to get home to give him his medicine. So, I mean, that's super important to me. Okay. Okay, and I just wanted to share this picture of Fanon. I just love it. He's like sitting there with his hands like this. I don't know, this picture is really sweet for me. I want you to have some takeaways and things to think about. This quote that I have here, I think some of you mentioned you've read Black Skin, White Masks. Who has read that? Black Skin, White Mask, excellent. Like, and just so you know, that text was his dissertation, but his all-white faculty, the committee, told him that they don't accept it. He's talking too much about race. And so they didn't accept it. And he wrote another boring psychoanalytic, there's line disorder, blah, blah, right? And they were like, okay, approved, done, here's your doctorate. But it's very important to know that this book got rejected because they felt he talks too much about race. Don't we have that issue again, right? In Florida, ban the books that make the white kids unhappy, come on, right? But he says, and I want us to take this apart, I am a literature teacher, I teach composition, word choice is very important, and he was very intentional about his word choices. And back to the idea that he's a playwright and he's a poet, oh my body, right? I love that he even does that, like, oh, like these odes, right? Oh my body, miss. Where, am I not on there? Oh my God, what happened? My clicker. Oh, no wonder you're all looking at me like, are you just, okay. So yeah, oh my body, make of me always a man who questions. And I wonder, let's just take a second. We have time. I'm going to just give you 1 second. Analyze that. What is he saying to us here? It doesn't have anything to do with please consider, so don't cheat. What is he saying? Oh, my body, make of me a man who questions. Why is he invoking the body? Why is he tying it to the mind? And what is he tasking himself with? Should I call on you, Shaylee? Everybody, Shaylee's brilliant, smart, wonderful. Did a really wonderful event on Korean comfort women at PCC. You should do it again at UCLA. Okay. Or here. You just got an invitation. Okay, go ahead. Yes, yes.
I feel like for me as a student right now, the whole idea of being someone who always questions is just integral to my education. Like, I feel like we as students, but we as just people should always be questioning the systems that are in place. So honestly, like, I mean, it's my finals week right now. I promise. I'm going to start reading more of Fanon, winter break. But for me, like, just an introduction to this quote, I don't even know how to take this in, you know? Like, I feel like just him bringing his body into it and asking of himself to make himself a person that always questions. I feel like questioning is its own way of, like, fighting back and resisting to me. So, I don't know, it's just a really powerful quote, and I really like it, and it makes me want to get into Black Skin, White Masks even more.
Absolutely, yeah. I think Lisa and then Arturo.
Yeah, I think of the oh my body as, because our bodies can really betray our minds, right? So that instinctual of wanting, the instinct may be driven by something else, but if you're constantly going, questioning, well, why does my body want to go do that? Why do I want to pull that trigger? Why do I want to do this? And so I think, to me, that's what I hear when I see the oh my body.
Yeah, wonderful.
Yeah, I really like this quote because it starts with "Oh my body," and I think the body is like a site of knowledge. It's like this place, like our bodies are places, but if we're able to be with our bodies also contain like all of our ancestry, going all the way back, and it's also the thing that colonial capitalist attitudes try to separate us from. Like we're always trying to separate the mind and body, they're trying to colonize our bodies and our minds and separate them. So I really love the idea that he starts with body, because out of like the connection with the body, those are where the questions are going to come out of too.
Absolutely, yeah, I appreciate that, Artur. More, yeah, yes, please. Our dissertation writer.
Easy, pal. I think the context comes up for me too. This is in Black Skin, White Masks, where he speaks heavily about being epidermalized, about he is in a black body, which like being made black by contact with the white man, right? And so the fact of being in this black vessel, and let that be, sort of provoke the questioning of what's really going on here.
Yes, absolutely. So you've read Black Skin, White Mask. Do you remember that scene? So everybody, there's this scene where he's sharing, for Fanon, he always thought of himself as a Frenchman. He didn't racialize himself. And so one day he's on a train in Paris, and this young child says to the mother, "Oh, Mom, look, a black man." And the mother says, "That's a handsome black man." This part they don't always talk about. And do you know what Fanon said? "Fuck you, madam." That was him, And so I appreciate that. He doesn't, as much as he didn't think of black nationalism as a way to fight against colonialism, he did understand racialization in a very real sense. And so back to Arturo's point, the reason I too like this quote very much, it's the last line of Black Skin, White Masks, is because he wants us to do that return to the body. Because what has happened with whiteness ideology, settler colonialism, displacement, war, genocide, ethnic cleansing, our bodies have become sites of tension where the brain rejects what the body might be saying, right? And there's a lot of work now around issues of like I was in a meeting with a bruja, and she was talking about limpias, and she was saying how, depending on where you're feeling certain things, that is your warning. And I know we've all heard variations of this, but she was saying, like, so if you're about to walk into a space and you just get really cramped and nervous, turn your ass around and leave. Who cares if they were expecting you to speak? Who cares if you had that exam? Who cares? Tomorrow the exam will be there, the opportunity to speak will be there. The idea is to slow down, right? Colonialism doesn't give us that opportunity. It's a constant go, 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 produce, produce, produce. These ideas may seem silly, but the idea of rest. Rest is resistance. Enslaved people didn't necessarily kill the enslavers in large numbers, though they did kill them too, but their refusal was the power of their being. I'm going to refuse to do this work today. And that in itself could stop the production, right? So, Gordon, yes, please.
Hey, everybody. I've got a particularly difficult thing to share with you all, but I think it's relevant for this situation. So I'm a black child from Harlem who lost his color as I hadn't done the work of decolonizing my mind. My body and my immune system crashed on me. So I'm a Jamaican, Louisiana black guy from Harlem who looks like this pink creature at this point in time. And the psychosocial dilemma that I was forced to live with was almost too much for me to bear. I prayed to a god or goddess to take my life away from me because I didn't want to live not in my black skin. I'm going to grow my hair out because when I keep a buzz cut on, they think I'm them. And nothing wrong. I got myself a white woman. She's my wife and I love her. And my children are multiracial children. But the reality is all of my personhood was in my blackness. And so what Fanon is saying to us, what your professor is saying to you is so real. And the mind can literally destroy everything. And I lost myself and I another story, and maybe we'll talk about it another day. But
Please, yeah.
I'm the living embodiment of the destructive process of racism in America. My father was legal counsel for the Marcus Garvey movement for 50 years. My mother and father had a law practice in Harlem for 61 and 63 years. Everything I did was like this: Ungawa, Black Power. Huh? And then my own people didn't know who I was as I walked the streets of Harlem. Get in touch with all of this. Europeans, Asians, Africans, get in touch with this man. He's got an answer for all of us.
Right on, yeah, thank you, yeah. Thank you, Gordon. More sharing, anybody? So yes, please, yes, no, yes.
I don't know where you're about to go, so I was like, well, let me.
Yeah, please.
But just even thinking this chapter, right, on violence and thinking about everything that's been said, the state, the colony, the colonizer, every border implies the violence that is required to sustain it. Every lease, every crosswalk, every speed limit, every law, all these things imply the state violence that is required to sustain and perpetuate those systems. And the colonizer, the state, celebrates, right, perpetuates, reinforces those things, and then prohibits or forbids acknowledging the type of violence that you're speaking about and the type of violence that you're speaking, like this disconnection from the land, from the culture, from the food, from the history, and just wants to ignore that and or burn all the books about it, right, and separate us from that idea, so that violence becomes this pearl clutching, oh God, how could when the violence happens every day. So that perpetual awareness of that contradiction is what I live with, because I encountered Fanon largely, so I'm like, thanks, homie. But it's necessary. That's the necessary. He uses the word process, and I think I translate that also into condition, right? It's a process, but then it needs to become an ongoing condition, because that will continue.
That's a great word. Thank you for that. Yeah, absolutely. Yes. More? Any? Yeah. So, I mean, again, tonight I didn't come here to give you any answers. It's more about a thought partnership. I would love for you to get back in touch with me after you have some time to think about things we talked about. And just keep thinking about this. And I'm going to leave you with a couple of things. I don't want to talk too much in depth, but there's tactics too that we can discuss. And what am I supposed to say, Martine? Hello to all the...
You're on live stream right now?
I am.
So just welcome all the cops that might be in the room.
Exactly. Because there is a lot we can do that's very tangible, and I will share a little bit with you. So this first question, right, I want each of you to think about this deeply and to really show respect to yourself in the sense of what skills do you have? Literally, what can you do? I'm a teacher. I also enjoy learning. And so one of the skills I offer is this, right? I'll read something, I research it, and then I'm like, hey, you want to talk about it? And then we do. And I'll do that everywhere. It's my paid job, but I love doing this sometimes more than that, right? Because there's a lot of structures and things, but this is really what my passion is, and I love it, and I offer it everywhere, anywhere. But also, if you can cook, if you're someone who's good at organizing spaces, literally, this box should go here, this should go there. I think All Power Books, Midnight Books, you all are doing amazing work. I'm going to try to plug in more into what you do. If you're not familiar, but I assume a lot of you are, they do a lot of excellent work at this level that Fanon wants. So I invite you to think about yourselves, and no skill is silly. No skill is negligible, right? Every skill counts, and this process of decolonization needs all of us and all of our capacities. So think about that. The other point here, and this actually I take from Malcolm X, who said, instead of plugging into, so for example, Lisa shared with us about what's going to happen with a chumash. None of us who are not chumash should kind of insert ourselves and be like, hey, this is how we're going to do it, right? We all know this. Never goes well. Instead, what I can do, is go to the Persians in LA and say, what skills do you have, right? What money do you have? Let's connect with the Chumash and see how our community can help your community. And so Malcolm X, that's a Malcolm X lesson, where you don't take yourself and insert into somebody else. You take yourself and go back to your community to help them come on board. It's a violent process. Oftentimes we're rejected because our people, our communities are so conditioned and have become comfortable in their oppression. Sometimes they have a hard time acknowledging they're oppressed, but that's part of the work, right? And so maybe that's what you need to do. Just get them on board with acknowledging they're oppressed. They can't go to the Chumash yet because they're oppressed and they don't know it. So that's our work. So I encourage you to build these networks in whatever communities you are. And it's not always about ethnicity and race. It could be about gender and sexuality. It could be about ability. It could be whatever it is that you feel you have the deepest connections. I wonder if anybody else knows this quoted word, boomerang effect. Has anyone heard of the boomerang effect? What do you know about it? What is the boomerang? Aimé César's boomerang effect. I think the French is like terrible effect, but I thought boomerang was useful for how we're going to talk about it. Do you want to share, Gordon? What's boomerang effect?
The way I understand it is you throw it out and it literally comes back on the community that didn't perceive that reaction.
Yep, exactly.
So the boomerang effect, I can tell you from where I'm from in Washington Heights and in Harlem, we thought getting rid of the Jewish and the Irish was a good thing, but then we had, and I'm gonna say it, we had my Dominican friends move in, and then we were wishing the Jews and the Irish was still in the hood
right.
because it was a different impact on the community, right? Black people were like, yeah, we got them out. We ain't know what was coming. If you've seen In the Heights, you understand, right? The Dominican culture kind of overwhelmed my hood.
Right.
And so that boomerang effect of like chasing somebody from the States, you didn't know what was coming. So that's just my
Thank you so much. That's it. That's perfect. And I love the personalization of that too. So César says in A Discourse on Colonialism, that's the text this comes out from, but he says that essentially this is something we keep hearing in different ways. James Baldwin said it too. If they come for you in the morning, they're going to come for me at night. And so your struggle is not independent of anybody else. And we have to be very careful. So when we think about this on the scale of empire and colonialism, why do we need to care about Palestine? Because what they are doing to Palestinians, they have been doing here to indigenous people, they will do to the rest of us and our othered communities, right? And if you're, you can be white, and if you're poor, if you're queer, if you're disabled, right? Any of these communities, they're next. We can think about the collaboration between the Palestinian rebels with the rebels in Ferguson, Missouri. Do you all remember that? Where they were giving advice like, oh, okay, so you haven't dealt with this before? They've been doing this to us. Let me tell you how you fight back, right? And so we see this kind of the idea of militarization of our law enforcement, the fact that a lot of the training today is being done by the IOF. This is the boomerang effect, right? So how are we preparing for this? How are you prepared for this? And of course, with this next administration, there are things like Martine just shared with me today. You're all familiar with Project 2025. There's an offshoot called Project Esther. And does anybody know about Project Esther? Do you know a little? No? Okay, Project Esther, just for sake of time, I apologize, I'm going to share that. Project Esther is coming for all the pro-Palestinian groups. They're going to target JVP, Jewish Voice for Peace, all the chapters of Students for Justice in Palestine, all the Muslim student associations, right? So be prepared. And I think what you can do, again, this is like the theme of the night, is building those coalitions, building your networks, being prepared. What happens, like, you know, here's another interesting thing. When Hitler was preparing to build his concentration camps, he looked to Jim Crow in the United States, right? And a lot of the people in Europe who were kind of, you know, at that time in the early to mid 20th century, they were sort of like, yeah, you know, King Leopold was right. Right, what he did there is that they are savage, they're backward, they're dangerous, and it's fine what they're doing in the Middle East. They're backward, dangerous. But then when suddenly that boomerang came back to Europe, and the communists were rounded up, disabled people were rounded up, the Romani people were rounded up, right, and the Jewish people were rounded up, suddenly it wasn't okay. And so this boomerang effect is a part of empire. It's nothing new. I'm not saying this to scare you. We've seen it happen before. It'll happen again. It's part of that process, but you need to be prepared. And the best preparation is coalition building. That's the best preparation. And finally, how many of you are familiar with Fred Moten? Yes, okay, yes. Fred Moten, sometimes he's identified as an Afro-pessimist. I'm not sure he thinks of himself as an Afro-pessimist, but there's a lot of correlations. He wrote a manifesto in 2020, sorry, 2022, somewhere there. And in this book, which is called The Undercommons, here we go, I'll show you in the next slide. Thank you. There in the middle, he discusses how we can be ungovernable, right? I love this word. Gigi is ungovernable, for real. Like, this is why I love dogs or cats. Dogs are a little more governable. They need it. They're like, please, put me on the leash. Versus cats, right? So you can think of it as, how do we become more like cats? This ungovernability, I think that's one of the ways to move forward. In my opinion, I would love your thought partnership on this. I think some of the tactics that we've been using haven't, or they've stopped working, I will say. We need new creative plans moving forward. So I recommend you look at that book. I'm not gonna go into the details of it because we don't know who's in the room, not here, but there and everywhere. I don't know, okay? We'll talk about maybe another time, a discussion just on the Undercommons. But the idea that our task is to be ungovernable. I will say this, and you are open to that definition and the creative thinking around it. These are some texts that I think are useful for us today in this moment of the decolonization process. How many of you are familiar with Ghassan Kanafani? Such a great writer, such a wonderful revolutionary. Again, Ghassan Kanafani was the Palestinian Frantz Fanon in many ways. A journalist, a thinker, a writer. He was a spokesperson for the they always do like, it's a PFLN, the Palestinian Liberation Front, but in French it's like the other, anyway, okay. But also someone, prolific writer, but he also picked up his gun. He was assassinated by Mossad in a car bombing with his niece. So just one morning, he's taking her somewhere, he starts the car and the car explodes. And I think I heard someone say, you know, like, why are these men considered so dangerous? What is the danger? You know what it is? Their deep love. They love. And it's maybe cheesy. Sometimes I struggle with some of this cheesy, like, oh, it's all about love, but it is. Like, it really is. At the core of Frantz Fanon, you know what's there? His deep, deep love for everybody, for everyone. And he does have hope. There's a lot of hope in his work. And the hope is in that love. Let the love move you. Let the love move you to love yourself, decolonize. Let the love move you to connect with others, right? We have Filipinos here, we have Chicanos here, we have Black folks here, Koreans, right? All these beautiful cultures, communities with all of their multiple ways of resistance. When I see white men, I think of John Brown. Right? We love John Brown. There's a lot of good white freedom fighters. So So I think that's really at the core of a lot of this, and in these texts too. Look at me, I put bell hooks all about love, and I'm like, it's all about love. That, I didn't even realize. Okay. There it is. So thank you, everyone. I'm gonna stop here. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you. Questions, any comments? I'd love to hear from you. What is no? Oh my God. He's ready to go. Anything to hear? No, please. Any questions, comments? What are some takeaways for you? Besides like the things I want you to take away. Anything? Did we stop the live stream?
Oh yeah, we can stop.
Oh, no, I mean, hi. I don't. I just. Okay. Any questions, comments, takeaways? What's something you're gonna think about more? It's okay. It's a lot. There's a lot. Yeah, Lisa.
I'm going to think about my communities and like expanding, the expanse of what that looks like for me here in LA and around the country, but mostly sort of my immediate communities and expanding what that looks like.
Absolutely, yeah. And I just, if folks don't know, but Gordon and Lisa are very involved community organizers. They do a lot of good work in many different ways. I'm honored you're here. Thank you. Other takeaways? Yes, please. Here, Savannah. Thank you.
I think the one that really resonated with me, that kind of summed it all up, in that tangible action to address this is leaning into love, and how these systems of hate are so perpetuated us on like a psychological level, and like so much of it can really break you down.
Yeah.
That really reaching out of that and realizing that that is what the colonizer wants.
Yes.
They want you to not have that capacity to love, because it's so integral to just being a thriving community, thriving person, and integrating everything into this one kind of a holistic system. And if you break that foundation, then you don't have anything there. You know, how do you water a plant without water or soil? It's like it's as fundamental to human existence.
Absolutely.
And I think trying to address that within ourselves, within our communities, and trying to lean into love, even though things are trying to tell you to hate, I think that's a step forward.
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. And I'll be honest, I struggle with that. Like I'm telling you, it's all about love. I'm like, I hate this person. I hate that person. It's a daily challenge, you know, but we try, we do. More, please? What else? Any particular takeaway? Yes, beautiful, yes. I feel like a teacher in the classroom. We've heard from you. Hold the thought. Can I hear from someone?
I had a question that.
Yes.
So it's kind of based on how you're talking about how like violence could be interpreted kind of very broadly, and I also kind of got that feeling from reading Fanon. And but it didn't seem like he made a lot of distinction on different like types of violence, at least in this piece. And it seems important. For instance, a couple examples would be like in the quote on annihilate the colonists in regard to Palestine, that could be interpreted as either annihilate the Jews in Palestine or annihilate Zionism, which is, I think, an important distinction. And then also, like in the protest movement, it's like inherently violent. A lot of protest is inherently violent, but how can that be consistent with the nonviolent movement or nonviolent tradition? And where's like the distinctions in methods?
That's such a great question. I'm gonna put my partner on the spot because we just had this conversation about, I don't know how many, you're all like, were you born like 2 years ago? Like, sorry, with all due respect, but anybody a part of the protest movements in the 80s, 90s? I wasn't either, I'm not that old, but some of you know, okay, so here's what I've heard. But there would be movements in LA, pro-Palestine, a lot of it was for labor issues. And it would start as protests with like speeches and songs, and there's all these like beautiful ways of resisting and refusal. And then the Maoists would show up. And immediately a car is set on fire, you know? And so it came down to, I share this to say that that was a weakness of the movement, right? Where eventually from the activists and organizers I've spoken to about this, they stopped putting on these protests because the community of the Maoists only wanted to come and set cop cars on fire. Not that that's a bad thing to do. Just kidding. Right? It's like, I will not do it, but others do, and it's okay. And then Martine was like, but in a sense, doing that delayed the enforcement. They have to replace the car with the people's money. He made sure to say that, right? But there's like that tactic works. The problem is the lack of unity. You have this goal, you have this goal. The ultimate goal isn't decolonization, which is that process, which requires community, which requires conversations, which requires that, interaction. I don't know if I'm even answering your question. I just thought it was cool to let you know the Maoists would set cop cars on fire. Yeah, it's really amazing. I don't know where they went. Was that? I know they were the Maoists. Mao is all about it. So. Other takeaways? Any other? Yes, please, here, I think, and then yes.
Hey, yeah, thanks for the great presentation. I wanted to, on this discourse of decolonization, I think it's very, very important to highlight something about Fanon that I think gets lost a little bit, which is the Fanon of Hegel. Hegel was a philosopher of dialectics who was carried forward in Marx and who was carried forward certainly in Fanon. And when we talk about the violence of decolonization, I think it's easy to lose sight of what that means for Fanon specifically. And I think what he's talking about is what Hegel referred to as sublation, which is a complicated concept, but basically what it means is both the negation and the preservation of the past. Negation and preservation. And what is negated is this, what Fanon refers to as this Manichaean opposition of good versus evil, Arab versus Christian, black versus white. And this is the false opposition that is established under colonialism. And it is an opposition that is a response to alienation, I think. I think that's what Hegel would say, and I think that's what Fanon would say, is that colonialism is a response to the trauma of alienation that white people have tried to escape from through the colonial project. And Fanon's idea is that abolishing colonialism does not represent another escape from alienation. It is getting back in touch with alienation. And I think that is the political project of decolonization. And that can't just mean, I liked how you talked about for white people, decolonization is very important and more difficult. I can't just go on Instagram and say, oh, German, Armenian, and that's my identity now. I have a safe kind of decolonized identity under conditions of continued colonization. That's not sublation. That's not what Hegel means by decolonial violence. And also, just setting cars on fire is also not sublation. That does not mark a military defeat of the colonial power, which is again why, like you brought up, coalition building, to build a serious political project that can actually militarily defeat, and that's ultimately what we're talking about, militarily defeat the colonial project. And so I think, looking at colonization as this escape from alienation that is immature, and thinking of decolonization as a mature sublation of this false opposition that is a flight from alienation when actually we should be going towards alienation, which is universal. We can't just construct some false opposition to escape from it. It's universal. That's what it means to be human. And that is part of the project of sublation or decolonial violence. So I think, that aspect of Fanon, I think, gets lost in some of the discourse of what he really means by decolonization. Also, I think Gigi is governable. I think she knows where the food comes from, right? Even if she acts like erratic and, anarchistic, I think she's not as ungovernable as she appears. Okay, anyway.
So I think my very short answer to that will be that for me personally, and I take my time over 16 weeks in a class to explain this, Hegel is trash. And so is Marx. And I'll tell you why, and I'll explain to you why Fanon is, I mean, we say I'm a Marxist, I'm this, I'm that. I'm a Fanonian. And the reason I'm a Fanonian is because he calls them out and he says, your discussions about alienation, sublimation, all of this, ignore the fact that you don't even think of me as your human equal, right? Due to this creation of a race-based system of superiority. So if Hegel's talking about the master and the slave needs a master, but the master doesn't need the slave and all this stuff, he's talking about white people. And that's a huge problem. Karl Marx was asked to write about the condition of enslaved black people in the United States, and he failed to do so. He absolutely failed to do so. I encourage you to read Marx's writings. Babe, what's the book called? I couldn't finish it. I was like, motherfucker, like, here we go, white men of the Enlightenment, right? And they're just gonna start talking about, yeah, he writes about it, you can look it up. But with all due respect, I think that one of the things, even though Fanon is not a black nationalist, he is also not hiding from the fact that he is racialized, right? Just as Gordon shared, oh my body, oh my black man body, make me someone who questions. And what does he question? The very foundations of Hegelian thought, the very foundations of Marxist strategy. And so I think this is my 2 cents. You have this, right? But I do encourage you to think about ideas of the psyche and alienation, and how do we, build coalitions when you think you're superior, you feel inferior, et cetera, et cetera. But the fact that these are anti-black thinkers, and we are twisting and turning what they're saying to make it fit, is our doom. I wouldn't do it. Go to Fanon, go to Audre Lorde, go to Assata Shakur, go to Black Elk. There are other thinkers on these issues. And the idea of a militaristic defeat, actually Fanon says a lot about that, and that's not the end goal. Because at the back of this book, everybody, especially for the psychology interested folks, he has a bunch of case studies. He shares all the case studies of people that he has worked with, French meaning white, Algerian meaning not white, and he comes to the conclusion they're suffering from the same thing. And no other thinker of the Enlightenment, legacy says that. They don't say that.
Just the Civil War in the United States, Karl Marx.
Thank you. Please read it.
It's by Andrew.
Yes. Please take your vitamin B, relax, and then read it. Yes. Yes. Oh my God, no. Wait, it's.
Sorry.
No, don't be apologetic. Yeah.
I'll be quick. Is this thing on?
Yes.
Just kidding. I'm a Palestinian teacher. I work in OC. The thing you mentioned about violence, that lingered with me throughout this discussion. I think it's a very powerful thing to bring up in conversation because it's so true, right? Violence is not only in the physical, but it's in the mental, it's in the occupation of land, but occupation of identity. It even exists in the kufiya I see you wearing, which is beautiful. That ties in with education. Not many people know that a lot of our identity, our culture, even our kufiya is being stolen, right, by Israeli Zionists. And us even hosting this, having this space, it's really powerful. And I think leaning more into taking our education back, right? Because in the education system here, our curriculum is affected and Palestine is erased, as many realities are erased for many communities. So that's something to definitely be aware of, and I think you just bring that up in such an amazing way, especially with these book selections up there as well. So yeah, thank you so much for that, and I'm so happy to be part of this space.
Thank you for being here. Yeah, thank you. Did you come all the way from Orange County? Oh God, okay. I was like, wow.
I want to shout out you. I don't know your name, but thank you so much for walking
Savannah.
all night.
Savannah's
you
amazing.
have been MVP.
Yes.
Thank you so much for all that.
Yes.
But I wanted to highlight that one of the things that you said about the kind of it was basically related to the alienation that we're kind of experiencing through like this whole thing of the patients and the case studies and how they're suffering under the same condition. And this reminds me of this one video that I didn't even watch it, unfortunately, but my friend told me about it, where it's this psychologist who, he goes by like Healthy Gamer GG, if anybody's ever heard of him, and he talks about his clients and how a lot of clients that are suicidal are not mentally unwell at all. And he's going through this like, this whole process of like, no, you're not mentally ill. These people just genuinely believe that the lives they are living aren't worth living. And a lot of these kids are white folks. And so this kind of speaks to this sense of alienation, especially with like white men specifically actually having like the highest rate of suicide in the United States. Like you can see these kind of like pieces of the puzzle kind of coalescing and realizing that this thing is alienating all of us like so deeply, and it's right in front of our eyes, but it's like asking a fish to see water. You can't really truly understand it because it's just so pervasive around you.
Yes, absolutely. I'm just gonna say more power to you. I agree. That's great. Anything else? Are we good on time with Tatanka, Martine? Nobody wants him to have a seizure. You know what I'm saying? Anything else? Awesome. So nice to meet you all. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
I'd love to get your email. Of course. I'm still trying to conceptualize what psychology looks like in a decolonial context. I just need to keep having the conversation, I guess.
I guess, me too.
So yeah, do people even have cards anymore? I know people used to have cards.
I can give you, you can type it in your phone.
Yeah, I'll just, yeah.
Thank you for your participation. You're the only good student with the
I had a quick question about, because you're saying he literally laid out like a step-by-step process.
Yes.
What would you recommend?
It's in all
the
those
rest of it?
pages.
I'll read the rest of it.
So it's kind of when I teach, I pull it for the students.
Yeah.
But if you'd like to stay in touch too, we can continue.
Yeah. Where do you teach at?
I'm in Pasadena City College.
Oh, it's just your BCC.
I love it. It's so good.
You know, a lot of professors and even like high school teachers have gotten booted the past year. Like I have comrades that have gotten booted for their participation in the anti-Zionist protests.
Yeah.
And like, how are you doing it there, like with PCC? They must have a really cool administration, I guess.
They are. So far, so good. But we also haven't been too rabble-rousing. So everything's like, we applied to teams, we applied to, so they can't really say no. And that tactic's working. So.
Okay, well,
but yeah.
Because I'm still trying to figure out how all this works.
I love it. I would love to be